Sorry, I've got to start again because I'm recording. No, I'm not joking. I'll talk about the recording later. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. So it's looking at questions about universals, but it isn't. I don't know if there are universals, basically. And so perhaps it can't be about universals, or perhaps it could be. And that's what we're going to look at. Philosophy is a reflection of the times. And that we need to remember. From the sophists, the Greek philosophers, medieval times, Renaissance, go through Descartes and Kant and Hegel, existentialism, Russell, Wittgenstein, Baudrillard, Derrida, Rorty, right the way through to modern day. When people do philosophy, it is really looking at their time, where they are. Plato will look at we'll talk about slaves, etc., which we don't like today, but people look at where they are, and that's where their philosophy comes from. So despite that, but because of that, because times move on and things change, there's always something new, another angle. Okay, and here we are in the time of Zoom. And Zoom I found to be extremely interesting. I mean, we take it for granted. We're all sitting here from all over the world, and how I can describe Zoom is a prism, not a prison, the prism of the whole. Okay, it's a glint of sun showing up things you haven't seen before, or showing them differently. Now, we look at everybody here, and there are things that I began to think about that showed up a lot of the material, a lot of things that I was talking about, and I think that that perhaps it shows or demonstrates more clearly things you have already seen. Now, let me give you some examples. First of all, Nietzsche said it's not the answer that's important, but the question. Philosophers look for new questions. Is there anything in the statement that scientists look for answers while philosophers look for questions? And that is a rhetorical question. It's just, I find it an interesting question. It might be, it might be not. But by the way, I'm going to talk just for a little while, and then you'll be discussing, and then I carry on. I don't want you to think I'm going to talk for 1.5, 2 hours, which I can do easily. Those of you who know me know that I can do that. But I'm holding myself back. So as I say, philosophers through the ages asked questions that reflect their time. And along came Zoom to reflect our today questions. So a lot of what I write about, in fact, most of it, is about the self and limitations, the self. So somebody needs to mute.
The radishes you have to plant from seed.
Is anybody there with sound on from somewhere? I have to mute everybody, which I don't want to do. Okay, so, usually, mostly, in fact, always, when we talk, we don't see ourselves. We see everybody else. And on Zoom, we see ourselves. And that is a huge difference. I was thinking about that, and it's very, very unusual. But by the way, when Zoom came out, teenagers didn't want to do it because they didn't want to see themselves. They wanted to see others. But that's all changed. So my question is, do we see ourselves? Now, all of you can see yourselves. When we talk, we never see ourselves. Suddenly, we are somebody that we are talking to. We are talking to ourselves as well as to other people. So I'm asking, do we see ourselves as part of the others? Are we now part of of the other. Somebody's talking. Okay, so I would say no, we don't, because the fact that we see ourselves makes us still removed from ourselves. In fact, we're even further from ourselves because we're now somewhere else, which is very, very strange. Now, so it is the I, and when I say I mean each of you, okay? It is the I seeing me, the object. And me is an object just the way you are. And I've now, and we talked about this a few months ago, the difference between I and me. I am now an object, and I'm not usually an object. I am usually I, but now I'm part of what you are. So I've always been fascinated by the fact that when I look at myself, and remember I'm talking about I, meaning you. When I look at myself, I think I see what you see, but I have no idea what you see. I only see what I see in my subjective way. And I am wondering that now I see myself, do you see as I see myself over there? That's another rhetorical question. So I will stop soon, and then you can join in. I want to bring in the point about the dissonance between freedom and limits. There is a freedom of being in your own home. All right, and this is so different from going somewhere and sitting and listening to a lecture or a discussion. In your own home, you feel freer. You dress perhaps differently to what you would dress when you go somewhere. Okay, and there is the leisure of time, so you do stay longer. I can't imagine that if you go to a lecture you'll stay for 3 hours. I'm not saying you're all going to stay for 3 hours, but I can tell you that our last discussion, after 3 hours, there were 18 people there, still there after 3 hours, which I was very surprised at. I have to tell you, but you would never, I think, sit in a hall for 3 hours. There's something about being here in Zoom that makes a change. Now, the most interesting part of Zoom are the squares. That struck me. The squares, which are borders, are metaphoric, but real. Those are real squares, and we're in those squares. Okay, I would call it metaphorical reality, but I notice that is used in art. It's they talk about surrealistic paintings as metaphorical reality, but the reality is that we're all stuck in our squares the way we normally are, without possibly realizing it. So everything has a border. Everything has limits. We might not realize it, but the squares they're in now show us the limits. Not only do they show us the limits of where we are, but it shows us the borders between us and other people that we might not realize. So everything has a border, everything has limits, even space. Space has limits. Even nothingness, which is the absence of something, has borders. Its borders are formed by the objects within it. If you leave, if you go away and leave your square, there's nothing there. The absence of something is the absence of you, and I feel the absence of you. I don't feel the absence of somebody else in that square. I know who was there because I saw him or her. So borders are emblematic of resistance that's always there. All right, everything has resistance. Everything has a border. Gravity, speed of light, Infinity has an end. It's as far as we could possibly think of. It might exist and it might not. So everything is measured by its limits, and every experience is seen in the light of its limit. So you've got limits of comprehension that cause us to try and break them to know more. Life itself is in the shadow of its limit. We are aware of that ultimate limit, and you are aware of the ultimate limit through those borders that you don't normally see. So the square is there, and it's metaphorical best. We can see it not as theory, but it's actually there. We are stuck within that border that you can leave if you want to. While you're there, you're stuck in the border that we normally are. By the way, religion has limits set out by God, of course. And God himself is a limit to us and for us. That is in the Western monotheistic religions, of course. Not in the Orthodox Christianity or in mysticism, but that's something else. Now the squares are a retrograde move back into our castles. Look, walls that keep others out, all those next to you are out, and those are your walls, okay, and keep us in. So our homes are where we retreat to. You're in your homes now. You're in your castles, and you can prove it because you've got the limit. You've got the walls. You can see them. It's what we control. You are well in control when you're in those squares, which you might not realize when you're out of the squares, but here it is in front of you in glorious technicolor. But we have walls against the outside world, against modernism, against algorithms, against AI. They're there. We want to protect ourselves not very well, by the way. Walls are to fight against an existential fear, an anxiety, analogous to Kierkegaard's philosophical anxiety of boundless freedom. So what is the problem of boundless freedom? For Kierkegaard, it was anxiety, dread, angst, as unfocused fear. The mere fact that there's a possibility and freedom to do something, to do anything, even the most terrifying of possibilities, triggers immense feelings of dread. Kierkegaard called this our dizziness of freedom. The freedom to do anything is frightening. But here we are, we're protected, we have our walls, we're in here. This anxiety clashes with and is the dissonance of anxiety of the self against virtual avatars, algorithms, AI, and the like. The walls, the squares, are so that others can see what we want them to. We want them to see. That's why some of us have got nice backgrounds, Maurice. Some of us have got all sorts of nice stuff because people are going to see. You notice that I've got a blank wall. No, that's just a joke. I've got a blank wall because up there I've got things. But if I put the camera up, you won't see me, you'll see the things. But anyway, I've got a blank wall. That means something. All of you show us things, and you know that we can see them. Okay, they can see them, but they can't touch. We decide if and when we open the doors. We close the drawbridge by switching off Zoom. 2 more minutes and I'll stop for you to beat me up, okay? But while we are there, we aren't as protected as we think. I told you about the porn attacks that we had in very, very early on. We thought that we are safe here, and we weren't. We are now, I hope. We weren't safe. All right. We are protected by AI, supposedly, Terry will have something to say, AI supposedly can detect nudity, supposedly, and even profane language. I think they're working on that now. They will just, but of course, we all know what nudity is, but profane language is rather a more difficult problem. What is profane for some of us is pretty normal language for others, but AI has to deal with ourselves. So all is restricted in squares. You move out of your square and you move out of my world. But you never move out of your square, never. When you leave, you've still got the square. You can't see it, but you've got the square. All the things I talked about, you can now see because it's there. That's the amazing thing of Zoom. It makes us think about how restricted we are. Actually, restricted in so many ways, but normally we move around. You can't move around here. Although people can move around with it. People here have done all sorts of strange things, and that's not even eating. I mean, eating and drinking, they've been moving around. Somebody took all of Zoom into his car and drove off, which was really weird, still talking, and we were in his car. All right, some people wander around with it, etc., which is very, very interesting. So this is the self that we're looking at. I'm gonna have a pause now for discussion, and we're talking about the self and all the things that the squares are giving us. So please, you may attack me at will. And if Terry has something to say about AI, I'd be very, very pleased to hear it.
I'll make a quick comment about the, you are right to question the veracity of any AI attempt to detect things like profane language or even nudity for that matter. You can have all sorts of missteps on that. The problem with the AIs that we have right now is they are not people. They are not even a fraction of the awareness, cognition, sentience of any human. And that goes for the very top-notch AIs yet to be created. And the simple truth is, either you're just following some rules, sophisticated rules, and trying to find things that an intelligent being might notice, but you'll never get it right because you're just following rules. So the cognition that we have is too complex and too sophisticated to easily reproduce with the current technologies of AI. And that is including, as I say, the very top end. We're far more primitive than people realize. That said, AI can handle data quantities that humans cannot. And that compensates and provides an illusion of sentience that is not, it's deceptive. It's a different kind of intelligence, an important type, but it is not what we have.
But by the way, if you want to ask something, you can put a hand up. But you've got hands down there you can put up, but I see them very, 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 very clearly.
I try to do that, but I don't see a raise hand thing.
Okay, in that case, you can put your hand up if that's the case. The first one I think was Frank. Yes, Frank.
Hello.
Hi there, Frank.
I find when you talk about limitations, it sort of gives a negative aspect on the whole idea of Zoom. But on the other hand, you know, it creates a different kind of intimacy. If you look on television and you actually see you see celebrities and anchor people and presenters, and how do you see them? You see them within the confines of their own homes. And you've never seen that before. They've always come from studios. They've always been sitting in studios in a sort of very artificial built home, where here we go into their homes, we see pictures on their walls, we see pictures of their families, we see all sorts of things, and they suddenly become more human. And so I would say that although we can talk about limitations, I can say there are certain openings, and the openings to intimacy you get a greater contact with people who were completely anonymous at one time. You feel a greater, I wouldn't call it dissonance. I would call it anti-dissonance, actually, because you're moving in towards them, and it gives you a good feeling that the people who you once considered as robots or virtually anonymous celebrities who you'd never get to see in your life and you only read about and see pictures of are suddenly human beings again. That's the impression I get about Zoom.
Yes, yeah, it's a very good point. That's the dissonance is the intimacy and the non-intimacy. I mean, there are people that I have made very, very, very good friends with. I met actually not on Zoom, but on the internet. And there are people who come here quite often that I feel very, very friendly towards. I feel as though they've now become friends. They're here so often that they're part of the family, basically. But on the other hand, it's very, very flat. Yeah, Maurice, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Well, first of all, Frank, I just remind you that in the old days on BBC Radio, the newsreaders who were reading the news to an audience who would never in their lives see them all had to wear evening dress.
Correct.
We come a step forward from that. But
it's a good idea for this Zoom, by the way.
I agree with that. Ron, I have to congratulate you on being able to take the subject of Zoom and turn it into something so much more complicated and deep than I thought it could ever possibly be. I thought it was just a technological thing. And
haven't started yet.
I can imagine. And after all of these things that we're looking at on our screens are just shadows. I mean, shadows, images, and have no, may I dare to use the word reality? I knew I'd have a problem with that. The face you're looking at the moment, above the words Maurice Roth, the face is actually computer generated. I look nothing like this. But does it matter? I mean, I've chosen to generate an appearance of this sort. I've actually got a long beard and blue eyes, but
for any of you who are worried about this, I actually know him personally. That he's really him. Anybody else can fool me, but not this one. I know him.
Is he a robot?
Yeah, I know the robot. Yes.
That's the next stage. But the other thing I want to say, something that you said, Ron, that we're all in our separate little boxes, and you made a great deal out of that, which is fine. Except I would imagine there is now software, and if there isn't already, there will be soon, which could turn all of these boxes into one virtual group. After all, you can turn photographs into group photographs, even though you have only individual photographs of people. So the boxes will disappear if we want them to. We can all be sitting together with each other, but not really. Does it matter?
Yes, because that's not what happens. Well, even when people are together, they're all in their boxes. Yeah,
can I just say something about boxes?
No.
Oh.
1 second, because sorry, Frank, I'm going to get to you because I can only go to hands up and then come.
The boxes was the trigger. It reminds me of the song of, is it Seeger who made the song "Little People in Little Boxes"?
Yes, correct. Little boxes. There you have it. We're going back. Maurice, I got something to say about limitation, which you'll love very soon. But okay, thank you. We've got. Phil, you did find your hand.
Yeah, here it is.
No, the one in the box.
Okay. Look, what I got to say is, like, we exist in time. So we're always struggling between the box because it gives us a certain kind of limitations that define what it is, and we know what it is, and we're somewhat comfortable, and to a degree we also want to explore because time changes, and it just seems to me it's the balance between those two. I think if you move out of the box, I like to use the metaphor of the city. If you like move out of the city altogether, then you're in the wilderness and then you don't have enough reference points. But if you exist in the city itself, then you're contained within that system. And so you always want to, on the one that be in the safety of your situation. At this point, I'll use a military metaphor. But there's also times you want to break out, right? Because the enemy, or you would say existence or death, is always surrounding you, and you want to break out while you're alive so you could explore other possibilities. So
Break out to where?
break out to the other side, whatever it is, that unknown, because you know you're being contained.
You mean the not you?
Well, to a certain degree, that's true, because the not you, but the you that will be, which is different than a not you. I mean, it is not you, because you know if you exist in time, you will be another in a different way, because you'll be transformed. I'll give you an example. I'm an artist and I paint, and I'm quite familiar with the rectangle because that's where we exist in art. But quite often, you wonder, and there are people who does this, who decided that's too limited. Then what they're going to do is they're going to tape another piece of paper outside the square they start drawing there. And then they'll tape another square, and pretty soon you have this meandering pattern that's not the rectangle, okay? I myself, one of the sacred thing is that you do not want to cut a hole in the canvas, because that would be like violating the ultimate sin of, let's say, denying the form or God in a sense. I've cut a hole in the canvas myself in order to criticize what's inside the painting that already exists, right? So quite often you could break out from the inside of your own square.
Phil, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Where are you when you're cutting out holes? Have you broken out of yourself?
Well, yeah, in a way.
No, not in a way. In a way means you haven't. Have you broken out of yourself? Are you no longer yourself? Are you no longer there when you've cut the hole?
Well, I'll tell you an example. I was painting this picture, and at the end, I looked at it. I didn't like it because it was creating a perspective in a deep space, and I didn't want to do that because I believe that that's an illusion. So what I did was I actually painted a rectangle in the middle of it, and I put a stripe down it, and I paint out one half of the rectangle that's inside the square, the triangle that's inside. I think the top half red and the bottom half black. And a friend who was by, he came by and he saw it. He says, "Do you know that is the flag of the anarchists?" I actually didn't know, but I answered that even better. So I was actually outside of myself.
Well,
even better. And what I did after he left was I then cut a hole in one half the thing in order to see through it, because if I'm going to be an anarchist now at this moment, then I need to break through the canvas and see the other side that's behind the thing. Yeah, so at the moment that I was doing that, before somebody else entered and said, "Do you know there's a flag of the anarchist?" I was maybe within myself because I'm criticizing, this is too deep of a space. But some other information had entered in, and now I realize, oh yeah, he is actually saying something I even compliment. It's even better, because now I did not realize I was doing that. So then I follow through and cut a hole in it. So there you go. I was not me.
I haven't gone
in the
anywhere.
film.
That's the trouble. That's the point. Roland, I know you want to say something. You got to put your hand up, otherwise it's not fair. Everybody will say I'm asking somebody who's got his hand up. So I know you want to say something now. So Vivian, you had your hand up quite a while, and then I'm going to get to Jory, and I'm going to get to Moshe, and then when Roland's got his hand up, I'm going to get to him, and etc. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I think, like, speaking for myself, I have a very clear idea about who I am, but the feedback sometimes I get from other people is not matching with who I am. And seeing myself in this forum where I can view myself as one of many people, it gives me kind of a third-party view of myself and helps me to understand perhaps where my exterior isn't in alignment with my interior, or how I can maybe project myself in a different way that is more in line with my interior, so I can better communicate my identity and who I am.
That's because you're seeing yourself, right? Which you don't normally do when you talk out,
Right.
and now you're talking to yourself as well, and you can actually see yourself. Which, yeah, that is, yeah, that's yes, that's correct. Thank you, Jory.
Yes, I'm a question I'm perhaps hearing you posit is, are barriers preventing us from transcending our limitations? My response to that is, or is it other people? But I have some comments on Zoom because I attended in-person philosophy club at a cafe previous years. And so I have these experiences to contrast with it. One of the things I think is interesting about Zoom is in the display, every subject is on top next to the speaker and in everyone's display. And I think that's very interesting and compelling because I believe that psychologically that privileges each one of us for enhanced participation rather than passivity. I think it's a brilliant idea in the design of the product, and it seems to elicit a lot of participation. With the Zoom philosophy club meetings, and I've attended a couple different types or groups, the bigger sampling that is allowed, so you have people from all over the world potentially, you get more people, a bigger concentration of people with the eclectic tastes or interests and ideas. Whereas I'm located near Portland, Oregon, the group really, it has a strong group for a city of its size, but it's really small in comparison with a global reach. So that's great. And I think it's really a positive thing for people who like to talk about ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. I think Moshe, you're next.
Hi, Ron.
Hi there, Moshe.
Based on our previous conversations, I'm sure I'm going to have to come back to this several times to make myself clear. But when you were talking about nothing, and you were saying that that nothing has a border because the border is us, my body or something like that. And the equivocation alarm on my computer went off when I heard that. And I was thinking about a single object universe. And in a single object universe, I mean, you're saying that nothing is bordered by the single object, so that nothingness has a border. So in that thought experiment, I can understand that. But I want to understand what that space or nothingness would have the dual properties of being both limited and unlimited, because it's only limited in a single body universe, but in a universe where there are no bodies at all, it's limitless.
Can I just
I wonder-
say there's no such thing as a universe with nothing in it, because that means you wouldn't be in it either. So what does
Right.
that give us? Nothing.
It's a thought experiment.
Yeah, but
If the border of space is a body, and space only has a border because it has a body, or nothingness only has a border because it has a body, if you remove the body from it, then it becomes unlimited. It becomes unlimited. It doesn't disappear just because you disappear,
well,
regardless of your.
okay, okay. Yeah. You don't want me to talk about that because we'll go on for days. No.
Let me just add one thing to see
Don't
if I
start
can.
me on that, please. Okay, go on, Moshe.
All right, I see. I'm gonna have to come back to that one.
Yes, you
You
won't
let's
want
see. You and I are going to be best buds in another year. I want to go back to something that Phil said. You were asking him if he could break out of himself, and in as much as the reality of my world is made up of impressions of sense and imagination, I could alter that world by taking LSD, and then I'm no longer myself.
What are you?
Well, that's a good question, but I'm not the person who's talking to you right now, asking these kinds of questions.
But I just asked you the question.
I could be I could be colors of geometric colors of moving triangles and spheres and
You mean that
darting lights.
You mean those are the things that you see?
Well, suppose we're in a universe that only impressions exist. There might be in that particular universe, let's say 10 or 12 impressions. I mean, there might be in that universe an impression of a headache. And there's only a headache when I run into that impression. I could then run over to another place and I could have an impression of a waterfall.
Yeah, but there's no headache without you having it, right?
Well, where am I in the headache? There's just the headache.
Well, no, it's not just that, it's you having it. You're not having anybody else's headache, you're having your headache. Without you, there's no headache.
Where do I find myself in the impression?
I have no idea. Because I'm not you. But when you have impressions, you have impressions. It's you.
Well, if only impressions exist, I must be an impression among the other impressions.
I know nothing about that. That's too mysterious, too mystical, too spiritual. I don't know what you mean. If they're impressions, somebody has them. If there's nobody, there are no impressions, and we can't even talk about it. I mean, what are impressions? Impressions are by people. You want to get rid of people and say, let's imagine there's a world without people and I'm not in it. Well, I can't follow you there because you're not there. You've gone. I mean, I don't even know you've gone. It's like the tree in the forest. But we'll come back to that. We're gonna
like I said, well, I'll have to bring this up a couple more times.
Yeah, I bring it up every time, but not because I want to, because somebody always does, and it gets me going. And you'll have to read my books, then come back to me and tell me where I'm wrong. Is that fair? Yes.
You know what Plato said about the written word. You know, when you read the written word, you ask it a question and it can't defend itself. It needs its parents.
Correct.
And that's why our forum is best here.
Exactly.
And I have started, I did read the Nothingness book, and I quite frankly got nothing out of it.
That's good. That's brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted you to get. Okay. Roland, you got your hand up. Okay, and then Bill. Okay, so that.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is kind of worms, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot going on here. I think one of the things that comes up for me here is the question of knowledge, because when I mean, Phil mentioned about sort of breaking out of himself, and Mosh has also had this idea of conceiving of something which is where there is no one there. My question is that it's that word is that lurks in these things. This is happening, or this could be happening. There is a comparison going on here. Someone is making a judgment, an evaluation, and there is no knowledge without a knower. Knowledge, knowing, is no different in terms of the behavior involved than eating or jumping or singing or dancing. Knowing is a thing that we do. So the product of knowing is knowledge. It's something that we do. It's something we create. So if we're not there, we can't create it. As simple as that. There isn't anything. So any assertion of knowledge tends to be an assertion of evaluation of some kind. I can point to a cup and say, well, I know there's a cup there, but I'm essentially creating I'm evaluating a comparison between my present experience and my memory. So no one can do that except for me at that moment. The cup, my knowledge about the cup is constructed by me on the fly. It's not constructed by anyone else. So when we start to talk about something that is, when there is no one to know, how do we do that? What does that mean? How can there be knowledge without someone who is knowing it? It's essentially impossible, because it's a state of mutually exclusive simultaneous conditions. We're saying someone knows, but there is no someone. Well, that's impossible. So I think when it comes down to things like, well, I know that I'm outside myself, this is a mistake. It's simply a conceptual misunderstanding. What's going on is one's changing one's state of self. So it's like being in a different room. I could be in one room in my house and move to another room. I can remember the room I was in before, and now I'm in a new room. But it doesn't mean that myself has gone anywhere. I'm now who I am now. And even if you are in a state when you think you're not yourself, then who is doing the thinking that you're not yourself? And who is able to make that statement, that evaluation? I am not myself. Well, surely there is something making that evaluation. So I think one of the basic problems with knowledge and how we see things is this projection of the evaluation that only someone who knows can make onto the outside world, as if what we are knowing has independent existence from ourselves. And to me, I don't understand why anyone would think that. I know that it's an endemic idea, but I cannot get my head around it, because no one would say that you can leap outside yourself, or you can eat outside yourself, or the act of eating somehow produced a result that was outside yourself. And any act that we perform, anything we do, is something we're doing. So if we're talking about the output of our actions, we cannot disassociate that from ourselves. It's impossible. It's ludicrous, in fact. So this is a key point, I think, in relation to any assertion of knowledge. I think for some reason, and I've come into philosophy through a very backdoor route, so I've not gone down the normal philosophical routes. But to my mind, what I can't get my head around is the notion that you can have knowledge without a knower, or indeed that knowledge state can in any way be disassociated from a knower. And so, as far as I can see, knowledge, what we know and what we see, what we think we see, what we experience, is directly connected with one's personal identity at that moment. And when your identity changes, your state of knowledge changes too. So that's my 2 cents.
Impossible. You mentioned impossible. I think
yes.
I think even that you can't say, because impossible means that we think it's impossible. It is beyond impossible.
I would actually possibly take issue with you on that. I think we can say it's impossible, but we can't say it's universally impossible. What I can do instead is I can offer to someone the chance for them themselves to put the statement, put the concept into practice. I can say to, say, Phil or Frank, or sorry, or to Mosh, I could say, well, okay, can you now tell me who is knowing this state of not being? Who is doing that? Where is the test that we can put into practice, that we can actually demonstrate to ourselves, not to me, but actually for an individual themselves to be able to, as it were, put their own assertion to the test. Mosh mentioned that he could have a psychedelic experience where he would experience himself differently, but he is still the evaluator, or something, you could say, a self that we might call Mosh's consciousness, whatever we happen to call it, is still aware of that and is making that evaluation and is able to carry that experience back to his, in quotes, normal state of self and compare it. So we can't say that he is, well, from my point of view, it seems logically inconsistent to say that he is no longer making the evaluation, because who is that? Who is that person? So when I talk about impossibility, I don't talk about it as an objective truth. What I more say is, let's hand that evaluation to a person and say, how is there an evaluation that you know about that you have not evaluated?
Yep. Sounds fair to me. Yeah, Bill, thank you.
You know, the magic of Zoom for me is the simultaneity of perspectives it allows. For me, I am sitting here having an interior monologue with myself about what I'm saying to you. And at the same time, I'm out there as an omniscient observer of myself doing that. I don't have that experience aesthetically very often. In fact, I never have it. In novels, I get interiors, I get exteriors, but I don't get them all at the same time. In literature, but in this experience, in this relationship, the simultaneity is dizzying, because someone was saying, I'm seeing myself for the first time, talk to others, and I'm having a reaction to myself that I'm not liking or I do like, or I'm talking to myself in a context that I can understand from the standpoint of an omniscient observer, where I am in the world and how I'm talking about philosophy that I love and issues. So the simultaneity is the character of the experience of Zoom that I would love to explore in greater detail, because it's out there in a kind of nebulous way, but I think we could talk about that more. Thanks.
You need to take the mushrooms that somebody talked about, and then you'll see the psychedelic stuff. No, you're right. I only have a problem with simultaneity, which I don't think exists, but we're going to talk about that later. It does look as though we're all here together, and in fact we're not. But I'll get on to that in a minute. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Phil, did you want to answer something?
Well, I want to say something else.
Yeah.
An anomaly. Okay. I was, since the beginning, I've been trying to figure out what kind of image am I looking at on the screen. Okay. Because I'm looking at myself in the screen, the top ones. I don't know how I would look when I'm actually projected on the screen. I think it might be different. I noticed that I see myself in the same ways I would see myself in the mirror. So I do not see myself in that image as you would see me. And I've been trying to puzzle why that is the case. Obviously, it has something to do with the camera. That's one of the reasons why I went off camera for a brief moment, because I want to check how the picture is and all so forth. So on the screen, the picture is on that side, which is on my right side, but I looked at it, and if I turn around and look at it from your point of view, it should be on my left side rather than the right side. I even say, well, maybe there's some confusion there. So I looked at the figure over there, and okay, it's in the picture is leaning to my left. I turned around and looked at it. It's actually leaning to my right. So am I looking at it from your point of view or from my point of view, at least in terms of this image over there? Because I could very well go to a mirror and talk to myself, and I would see that image in the mirror. I wouldn't see it as you. Now, it could be different if you project it on the screen. I do not know. But that seems kind of funny because you brought up like now you could actually begin to see how other people see you. But in fact, you're just seeing a mirror
I said
of yourself.
I said the opposite, actually. I said we can't. I wonder whether what I see now looking at myself is what I look like, because now I can see myself, but I have no reason to think that I see myself any less subjectively than I do when I look into the mirror. I have no reason. I have no idea, and nobody can ever tell me what I look like. It just can't. Whatever they describe is what I see. I do not know what you see. That is very disconcerting. Makes no difference. It's a mirror, or whether I'm now part of all you lot. We're all together on this flat screen.
Well, but it seems to me, if that's a flaw in the Zoom image, and you want it from your point of view seeing me rather than me seeing myself in the mirror, they could certainly electronically figure out some way to reverse it. So I actually see you seeing me, then I would actually have a sense of seeing myself as the other, rather than seeing myself as just standing in front of a mirror, talking to you guys, and assuming that you're seeing me as I see myself, which obviously is not the case, because I see me as I talking to myself. You do not see me as me talking to myself.
Correct.
At least in terms of the image. It might be, there's conceptual images too, but at least in terms of the reflection, that could be corrected pretty easily. Somebody could write a algorithm and reverse it. So just flip it.
But reversing it doesn't make it more you. How can you see yourself not subjectively? How's that possible?
Well, I'm not saying about the conceptual part, but at least the visual part, I would actually see myself. You know, I mean, there's a surrealist image where the guy is standing in front of the mirror, and what he see is not himself reflecting, but the back of his head, which is actually the way it ought to be if somebody else was standing behind you and see you, the back of your head. So I mean, like, so there's something that's disjunctive in the technology itself. I've been trying to figure out whether that's just like, I'm not seeing it right, or whether it actually flipped. Now, like I said, I'm seeing that little image on the top that's on the row, and on the bottom is a picture of you. But I'm maybe it flips around when you bring it down in that sense. So
I don't care whether it's flipped round or it's upside down. Whatever we see would have to be subjective. It has to be. It doesn't matter what you do with it. It doesn't matter if you see the back of your head. By the way, you'll never see the back of your head and your face at the same time. You'll have to move your eyes from those two images. You'll never see them at the same time ever. And you don't see you don't see your face in one go either. Your eyes flick from one thing to another. But anyway, that's not the.
No, I think you could place mirrors, let's say 3 mirrors, in such a way that you could see, if you put in the right way, reflecting only the back of your head, and then when you look at that,
and then you're right, and then
reflecting in a third mirror, you will see the back of your head.
You're right, and then you said it, and then it's not together, and then you see it, and then you're right, and then that's my point. It's never together. And then I do that, and then I do that, and I look very, very quickly from one to the other, but it's always one after the other. But yes, very interesting. Vivian, thank you for your patience.
No worries. This is to Phil's point. They found that in social media apps and things like that, if they mirror the image so that when you look at yourself, you're actually looking at a mirror image of yourself, that's what you're used to seeing. So you're a lot more receptive to that kind of image. When they show the image like a camera, like somebody viewing you from the outside, then everything is reversed and you can see a lot more of your flaws. So people enjoy the social media experience a lot more if they see that mirrored image. So I'm guessing that's why Zoom decided to use a mirrored image to reflect people's faces rather than an image like somebody from the outside looking at you.
Well, could I make a brief comment on that? I remember reading article. I remember reading article when they talked about President Carter, and they suggested he should part his hair from the other side, because to him, when he looked in the mirror, it looked very natural and normal, right? But other people would see a difference. So he started parting his hair from the other side, and actually things changed in terms of public perception of him. So that's kind of interesting. He actually decided, okay, maybe that's true. I just saw myself as it is and it looks fine, but maybe not so fine to somebody else. So
I wonder if Trump ever looked himself in the mirror. So sorry about that, folks. Couldn't resist it. Who's got a okay before Frank? Yes, I'm coming to you in a second, Moshe.
There's no doubt about it that what we see is a subjective perception. Everything is in the perception of the individual. But on the other hand, we have to agree that we accept an image according to an approximation of the image. And if we didn't accept the approximation of images, we would never understand our appreciation of the Western idea of beauty. I mean, the whole idea of how we appreciate beauty in the Western world, which comes originally from the ancient Greeks to our modern times. I mean, there is a certain consensus involved here. There's a certain understanding that there are certain rules and regulations within our minds that says symmetry here, beauty here, and that's the way we appreciate art. Otherwise, if we didn't have this common approximation of this common consensus, we wouldn't be able to understand art or get to any agreement on art or any appreciation of the development of art since thousands of years ago.
Correct. Everything is approximation. Everything. But everything. Anybody want to argue with me? There is not a single thing in this world that is not approximate. The closer you get, the less approximate it is, and the more it disappears into lots of little bits. And the closer you get to every little bit, Terry, I can't hear you. Terry? No, Terry, I can't hear you. Terry, I can't hear you. So you're right. And the fact that we see things approximately in a similar way means that we are part of the human race. We agree on things, but only approximately. We agree on vocabulary approximately enough when we talk that we will understand what we're saying. If we're speaking the same language, of course, we understand what we're saying, right? But if you zoom in into individual words, you'll realize that you don't really understand the other person at all. This happened. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Because I can't hear. Yes?
I can hear you.
Oh, good, because Terry.
It's working again.
Oh, good. Now, it's an example I've given before. When people make a contract and lawyers work on it, and every word, where's Bill? And every word has been worked out. It's brilliant, and they sign it, and everybody agrees until somebody brings up something they don't agree with, and they go back to the agreement, to the contract, and they start arguing about the words which they agreed with before because they're approximately good enough for everybody to agree. But once you get down to the nitty gritty and go for every single word, you'll find that the whole thing explodes. People do not do not work when it's not approximate. The less approximate it is, the less we understand each other. We only understand each other because we are in approximately the same system. So I agree with you, Frank, but everything is approximate, and for us, it works. We understand each other here. It's when people say, would you please define what you're saying? And then we get into big trouble. Because first of all, people think that it's all about definitions. Let's go to the dictionary and we'll work out what free will means. Let's look that up. Or consciousness, that's a good one. Look it up in the dictionary and it works. Of course it doesn't work because it's all about what things mean, and we can never agree what things mean. That's why people have been discussing consciousness for a couple of thousand years, which is strange when you think they've been speaking the same language, apart from the Greeks that nobody understood anyway. But anyway, yeah, yes, Terry, yes.
My insolent question before was, it sounds like you're saying that the universality of approximation is an absolute truth rather than an approximate one.
A good one, you little devil. No, I'm not, because the absolute truth.
Why not?
Okay, I'm coming to it. I've got to think while I talk. Hang on, because an absolute truth is approximate as well. So when I say that everything is approximate, obviously when I say everything, I mean approximately everything. Everything that I can possibly say to you is approximate. But I know that everything. Pardon?
So some things are not approximate.
Everything is, including the everything. You cannot give me a list of everything, right?
We're getting into paradoxical territory.
I know, I love it. It's the only way I can get. The only way I can get out of this. Terry, if you say to me that everything is not approximate, right? Then I've got to say to you, well, would you please give me an example of everything there is? And you'll go through a long list. It'll last a long time, and I will say to you, well, that's not everything. There's more. What about the things that might be everything? So at some point we will say, okay, I give up. I hope you'll say this, I give up. Everything is approximate as well, because I just can't get to it.
Well, and not getting to it actually is part of the key, because in all of the liar's paradoxes, Gödel's paradox, there's always an element of assuming the existence of an infinite set that already exists. And yet in practice, you can never get there. You always are going towards it.
Exactly.
And that's the true resolution of all of these paradoxes, is you're actually just gotten yourself into a loop. Could I make a comment on something earlier? I had myself muted the whole time and I didn't know. Going back to what Marie said a long time ago, I thought he made a very good comment about how we're seeing just shadows here on this. But my question is this: since when is what you think of as an image of the blue sky really blue light? Your brain never sees blue light. Your brain only sees some kind of a signal that's carried by neurochemicals and electrical pulses into your neurons. The blue light never gets close to your brain. You're not seeing blue light, you're seeing a shadow of the blue light. You're seeing a message about the blue light. How is what we're doing here fundamentally any different from that? One of the things I find fascinating about technologies like this is, to me, it extends the reach of who I am in some odd fashion that I could not really have pictured otherwise. And we don't know where that may be, but I don't see it's that fundamental of difference, because there's too much about what we are all the time that is shadows of shadows. And instead, it seems to be the flow of information that actually is the real kernel of what comes in and how we see those things. And by the way, the next thing after Zoom, I'll tell you what it is right now, it's already going in part, is virtual reality, in which you really do go to a meeting and you sit with people and you talk to them. And that's, you will continue to see that till we get to what I call the holographic deck limit. You know, when you get to the Star Trek holograms, that's when you've reached the limits of human perception. You can do it, but slow work is being made in that direction. That will be the next Zoom type of technology, and we'll have debates about that too. So Can I throw
Yes.
in one other comment miscellaneous that I had accumulated?
No, that's absolutely right. I've written something about virtual reality. It goes back to, we talked often about reality, and virtual reality is not any more real than what we're doing now. It would look real and look more real, but we are shadows. I think you're right, Maurice, and that would naturally bring me to Plato's cave. Of course, we all know Plato's cave, I think. But basically, the idea was that there were a group of people who were sitting chained to a fence. They couldn't move at all, not left nor right. There was fire behind, and what they saw was shadows, and that's all they saw. That was it. That was the reality, the shadow. And there's another part of it when one of them gets out. It goes in the sun, sees the sun, and sees real things, and he comes back and he says, sort of, is blinded by it. He said, that cannot be. And he goes back to being, I have seen real stuff, and they say, you're nuts. The real stuff is there. So that is the shadow, and perhaps that Zoom is a modern version of Plato's cave. Because what we're seeing are shadows. Maurice says shadows, and that's what we are. The reality. I got to be careful here. Roland will leap at me. I've got to be very careful. The reality is not what's outside Plato's cave. I don't go along with Plato's cave at all, by the way. Plato's cave intimates that there is reality. There is. All you do is go outside. And I say, and so does Roland, that there is no reality. What is real just doesn't exist as such. There is no possible way that we can even think of what reality is, because as Terry said, we see a blue sky. What is a reality? Is reality quantum stuff? Is that reality? Well, no. And if it's reality, and my table is made of atoms, then how is it that then my table is not real, but the atoms are real? All this is going round and round in circles to talk about reality didn't exist. We talked about reality a lot, and we talked about it last time. We went quite deep into it, but Maurice is absolutely right. We are all shadows, and that Zoom shows it to us very, very clearly, because it shows us the squares that we are in. And those squares, when we go out, we're still in squares. We still can't get out of ourselves. We are always subjective. We always only see what we see and don't know what anybody else sees. Those are the squares that we carry around with ourselves. We are always in squares. So that is my little thing. 1 second, Frank. Maurice, you want to add to shadows?
Just wanted to ask a small question. Maybe somebody can help me. It seems to me at the moment that the only, if I dare use the word reality, would be our emotions. Everything else is shadow. And the blue sky that Terry talked about with the signals, it's the same for touch, it's the same for smell, it's the same for all of the other things. The only thing that seems to me to be real, it's human, it's real, we all experience it. Nobody can produce a virtual emotion. We can pretend to have an emotion, but the emotion that we feel is real. Is that the only reality?
No.
I ask.
No. Terry, you got something to say about emotional intelligence? I'm sure you do.
Well, I would certainly agree with the comment that what we can do now is simply the imitation of emotion. If you had to say, how do I specify that I've generated anger? You'd have to prove that what you saw is anger, and you'd have to be able to say exactly what anger is in an actual human or biological creature. And we absolutely cannot do that. Nobody has a clue. There's all sorts of wild guesses. Everybody likes to invoke quantum. People like to invoke various aspects of information theory. The honest truth is we have no flipping idea what angry is. We don't know what it is. We don't know what red is. We don't know what, this is the old qualia issue. But to the degree that I think you can do fairly simple proofs, I can sit here and flip red and green in my mind, and I'm not seeing the photons. So something's going on in there. But we don't know what that is.
I wasn't trying to talk about the imitation of reality by computers, for instance. I'm talking about we as human beings who have emotions. These are things that all of us share. They are each of us feels what we feel. Nobody else can feel that emotion. They might recognize it being expressed, but my emotion, my anger or my happiness is mine alone. It is the only real thing in my life. Can somebody tell me that there is something else in life that is real, or that emotion is not real?
Oddly enough, I think I'm agreeing with you on that. I'm saying that I don't see how we can do it. I think the reality you're talking about what I see is kind of a solipsistic viewpoint, but it's very hard to get around that. That is the emotions, the sensations. How do I know what other people have?
I don't know what you feel at all, Maurice. I know you feel whatever you feel, but it's the same as you telling me you see a blue sky. I say that's not blue, it's whatever. I mean, I don't see why emotion makes you feel that that's more real than stuff that you see. And
because the blue sky is external to me, and I can interpret it one way or another. I may not be the same way that you interpret it. However, the emotion is internal. It's internal. It's within my humanity, and as such, it is for me the only reality.
Oh, like everything. Okay, Roland, I think you wanted to say something. Debbie, you're next. Okay.
Yes, I just
Moshe, you ready? Hang on, I can see you. I know you've been on a lot. Hang on. I'm coming to you. Don't worry. I will not leave before you talk. Okay, I'm here in my square. Roland.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as far as what is reality goes, I think Maurice has got a good point there, but I don't see any need to limit it to emotions. At the end of the day, our thoughts are real as well. Our desires, our associations with things, these are all, you could say, types of consciousness. So I would say if there is an umbrella category of reality, it has something to do with consciousness, conscious experience, and these different qualities of experience that we have, which could be conceiving of things, having emotions, having drives. Those things are types of consciousness, and they are, from the point of view of the experiencer, as real as each other. We might point to an apparently external thing like the sky, but it's not external, is it? It's actually, where is it happening? Where is that blue happening? As Terry said, it's happening, somewhere inside the observer. So can we discount that as being, if I see the blue sky, can I say that's not real? I don't think so. I can say it's real because that's my present experience of it. And I can also talk about how I feel about it. And I can also talk about why I might want to look at it. Those are all, to my mind, distinctly different qualities of conscious experience: desire, thought, emotion. And I also add to that a contextual association, because I think contextual association is a fundamental aspect of our consciousness that makes it real as well. How we group things together and how we associate things. So, yeah, so I'd go a bit bigger.
Yeah, just before, yeah, thank you. Before Debbie comes, I don't want you to misunderstand, Maurice. I'm not saying that what you're feeling is not real. I'm not, what everybody feels is real for them. whatever it is, however crazy it might sound, I accept that as real for them, but not real as reality, as something objectively real. Your emotion, your anger cannot be objectively real except to you. I mean, everything to you is objective, but it isn't. But it isn't to the rest of us, because we just can't see it or feel it. So I accept what you say, and it's real and it's big and it's important. But I can't. I don't know what it is. You'll explain it to me, and I'll say, yeah, that's something I would feel. But that's just what I would feel. I think I know what you're saying because I would feel it, but it doesn't mean that you are. That would be my answer to you. Debbie, you wanting to talk?
Yeah, I've been wondering now with the question of Morris over, we're talking about now about emotions being real, and also trying to combine it with perhaps AI and addressing also Terry. And Morris, when do you I mean, do you say, or your claim is that emotions are real in the sense that they exist? And I'm also very careful with using the word exist, that they are somewhere, or real as opposed to fake. That can I fake an emotion, or can I create an AI that can have these emotions the same way as we do? Because if we could perhaps reduce emotions to biological phenomena, then perhaps I could create a robot who can be angry, because I know what angry is, or I can measure what being angry, what we feel, what the bodily gestures or feelings are of being angry, being sad, being frustrated. I mean, especially now with the AI, with the algorithms, the computers, they know a lot or about me, about my political tendency, what I need to buy, what my shopping preferences are. I mean, with algorithms, they know a lot about me, and I'm wondering whether they don't know about my emotions or what makes me feel angry or happy or sad. And that's with the like. That's why we have, yeah, on Facebook, you've got like, love, hate, all that can actually measure your emotions and actually know what you feel. So if there is an algorithm that can actually know a lot about your thoughts, about what you're interested in, why can't there actually be an algorithm that can create emotions and sensations, and can and it could be exactly the same, and I could monitor and see what makes you angry, what makes you sad, happy, because it is after all just a biological reaction. So that would be perhaps, yeah, Terry.
Yeah,
That's,
no,
yeah, that's
very
something we
very
do.
interesting point. And by the way, one of the small companies that I worked with briefly before retiring, we worked with a number of leading edge companies in the job I did, was trying to do exactly what you just described. Their goal was, for instance, if someone is on a phone call, to tell if that person is angry, or to tell if that person was, anger was the main one they were going for. But they're actually, and that was years ago. So I'm sure that area has progressed quite a bit. And the scary truth is, current technology can predict how, not only whether, actually the harder part is figuring out whether you're angry. They are incredibly sophisticated at making you angry. And this is one, because you make a lot of money if you make people angry. You know that? That's one of the reasons why Facebook is on the verge of just of doing terrible things to civilized life in the entire world, is because they accidentally just kind of threw that in there, and they found out, oh, if people get really angry, we make more money. And nobody put a check on that. And it wound up producing feedback loops in which anger builds upon anger. Now, but
Well, yeah.
the more interesting part about your question is the difference is I see you right now. Okay, but if I put my finger out and I touch the image, it is a piece of plastic with glowing pixels behind it. But I can see you in great detail, and I can see your face, I can see what you look like with considerable precision. The trouble with the computers and what we're doing right now is even though they can do that, they can recognize who you are, what you look like, even imitate how you move in incredible detail. They have zero knowledge of the actual biology of who you are as a living person made out of cells and made out of organs. And at that level, all of this is just an approximation using a totally different technology that can be very good at predicting things, but it has no insight into what's going on inside. And that's, in a nutshell, is why, even though they can do incredibly good imitations of emotions, they're not done the same way. And they're just like that image of you on the screen. There's an image there, it's an electronic image, but the deeper understanding just is not there.
But for now, isn't
but
it?
for
Isn't
now,
it?
now,
For now, but
in the future,
potentially it is, I think, something that can be manufactured. I mean,
yes,
it's body temperature, it's heartbeat, it's
yes.
things that you can actually monitor. I
And-
can
and-
actually, you can act when we have these devices when we run, how many steps I've done, my body, my pulse, my heart, and we've got these devices already. So it's just a little step further, knowing if you see this politician, if he makes you angry or satisfied or bored or interested, I mean, potentially, couldn't there be an algorithm or a device that can actually test that? It's a dangerous thing. I mean, it could be abused by it depends who uses that, but potentially this could be created.
We are already at a point in which computer technology could create working, and in fact, you see some of this, the newscasters that are not real, that they have fake newscasters now. And of course, all of us are getting to know Alexa a little bit better every day, or whichever one, hey Google, it's not a very good name, but we are all getting more familiar with Alexa, and that will continue. Alexa will get smarter. She's going to know more and more about us. She's going to start asking us about how our kids are doing. And I'm not really joking. That's one of the goals they have. They will progress the technology to do that. Now, let me present it from a somewhat different perspective, though. We're doing that because we have silicon that's incredibly fast, and even though it does a terrible, terrible job of behaving like a biological system, just awful, just absolutely dreadful. It's a fast version of doing your taxes. That's all it is. You got an algorithm, go to part A, down part B, part C. That's all it is. It's just unbelievably fast at it. My own premise is, and I absolutely agree that I think we'll be able someday to do this. But when we do it, it's going to be by understanding something we don't know right now. There's something missing in our understanding of that. And my premise is that something like a sensation of red and green is an extremely valuable calculational aid. So if I see a green tree with red apples, I know the red apples are eat them, and I eat them. And I think that helps to bring my brain to a conclusion faster. But I would caution that the extremely detailed elaboration simulation using powerful computer technologies is a very different kind of reality that I'm familiar with, and is always filling out your tax form. No matter how impressive it is, no matter how unbelievably it tugs at your emotions, it's still filling out tax forms. That is the very essence of modern software. Whatever it's worth.
Can I say something at this point? Before I talk about this, I just want to say how Zoom is similar to the world outside. There's a subversive element that does chat and people who don't want to talk here are chatting away and saying things, and I can't answer them because they're all chatting. You would do me a great favor, because we are missing some really good stuff there, and I can't answer the good stuff. So you'd do me a really great favor if you would say, you don't have to, if you'd let us hear it, because it's really good stuff. It is really subversive, and I only see it afterwards. By the way, I see it all, so don't think that you can get away with it. I'm here, but anyway, coming back away from the subversive world, the thing about artificial intelligence and the truth is problematic. I heard an interview with Yuval Harari, and he said that computers know ourselves better than we know ourselves. And I think that's rubbish. We don't know ourselves. We don't know ourselves. So how would a computer know ourselves better than we do? The computer thinks, in inverted commas, it knows us because of things you mentioned, Debbie, about things we buy, etc. But it doesn't know what we are, what we feel as such, where our anger is. No, they don't, and they can't, because we will never know. We will never know ourselves. We can't. It's all completely subjective, and we have no idea, etc., etc. I don't think the artificial intelligence will get to know us better than we know ourselves. It might force us to do things we don't want to. That's something different. But I think that we might be putting too much into how human AI is, because it's making it to be more human than we are. And that is a very strange thing to think about. Moshe, you've been very, very patient, and I thank you. Go for it.
Okay, I want to address several things. One is this idea of approximation. Let's make something fanciful. Ron, you have a wife that you've been married to for 25 years. You have 2 daughters in college. They're home on vacation, and someone comes in the middle of the night, but your lights are on and you're awake. You've been watching Johnny Carson, and this person comes in and murders your 2 daughters, and you chase him out of the house. And the police come up to you and said, "What happened?" You said, "Well, someone murdered my 2 daughters." "Well, who was it?" I don't know. He was 5'10". He had 180 pounds. He had blonde hair. He had a club right foot. It might have been Kaiser Soze. I don't know what it is. And in an hour or so, they capture somebody and they bring him in to the station, and you're down there grieving your 2 daughters. And they say, "Is this the man?" And you say, "Yes, he is." And you are not approximating. You absolutely know who he is because you saw him do it. He has blood stains all over his hands, and there's no approximation there. You're not going to stand back and say, "Gosh, Lieutenant, that's only approximately him. It could be 50% him. Maybe a little bit. No, maybe it's a little less. It's approximately him." No, you are going to be completely accurate about it.
And I could be wrong. I think Bill can tell us.
Hold on. The correctness or incorrectness of what you're saying is separate from it being accurate. You're accurate that is the man who did it.
I think I am, of course.
No. I'm pointing out that in human circumstances, we have clear ideas of what accuracy is, and they're separate from any epistemic consideration. Now, I want to put something else out there about epistemic consideration that goes up to Roland. There is a point 6 inches behind my head. You can't see it. I can't see it. I can't put mirrors up and anything like that. But I have absolutely no doubt that there's a point 6 inches behind my head. In addition, I'm upstairs, but I'm certain that downstairs is still there. When I go into the classroom, I know that I don't know that the hall, but the hall is outside the classroom. All of these things exist, even though I don't even though I don't know it. And it's in some cases, like the spot 6 inches behind my head, in principle impossible for me to know it. Okay, because otherwise I'd be looking at mirrors and television images
But
and
Moshe,
things like that.
if you hadn't seen the point behind your head, you wouldn't be able to tell me about it. You remember it, that's all.
No, I've never seen it.
Oh, well, then,
It's impossible.
well,
It's
in that
impossible
case-
for me to see it.
That's it.
Well,
And there's a third thing too. The way this conversation is going, it's as if two people can't have a toothache.
Okay.
Okay, you can't have two people can't have a toothache because I only know my toothache. My toothache exists. It's somewhere, to use Debbie's term, but it's not really somewhere. You can't identify a toothache as 4 feet above the floor, 6 feet from the wall, behind or in front of the door. The toothache really drops out of the equation. I know that Debbie has a toothache because she reports it to me, because she's exhibiting toothache behavior. But it really doesn't matter what she's feeling. I know, and without approximation, that she has a toothache. I take her to the doctor. The doctor looks at her tooth. He sees that it's wide open and rotted at the root. Of course she has a toothache. So we have this certainty without approximation about things that exist, but cannot be in principle known.
can I just ask you, you know she has a toothache because she said so?
Yeah.
That's how you know.
Yeah, she said so, and she's grabbing her jaw.
Therefore
and
she does.
Yes, she has a toothache.
She has it.
But
and
Can
then
I just
she has it, but it's not 3 feet from the floor or from the door and 4 feet above the floor.
Morris wants to say something about
I just want to
toothaches.
say, speaking as a dentist, I can tell you that every toothache is different.
But every toothache is still a toothache.
Yes, it's a problem.
You have to grant me that. Every
No,
toothache is a
I
toothache.
definitely don't have to grant you that. No, not if somebody says they got a toothache and they don't. It's as simple as that. So a child that does not want to go to school will say he's got a headache, and he doesn't. Because he said it, he has it. I don't get it.
Either the person has the headache or they don't have it.
Correct.
Now, they can lie about having a headache, but it doesn't follow from the fact that a person can lie that more than one person can have a toothache. And toothache doesn't matter what you're feeling. The dentist recognizes it as a toothache.
Maurice, do you recognize a toothache as a toothache if somebody says I have a toothache, but they don't really have it and just want to see you?
Hey, I've spent my whole life trying to figure this one out.
Moshe, I think you're agreeing with Ron that it's a matter of approximation, because granted, toothaches are everyone's a little different. Maurice has just said that by actual experience. So if you don't approximate what a toothache is, how are you ever going to say anything's a toothache?
Well,
you have
I
to
guess
have a general definition.
Well, no, I don't think so, because it doesn't really matter what sort of subjective realism I have. We brought up this example of the blue sky, and I think, Terry, you've talked about, wavelengths and interpretation by the brain and things like that. All of that inside stuff doesn't matter for us to be able to say the sky is blue. Now, Ron is going to say, no, it's not really blue, it's green. And so then we might go into things where we'll go to a color chart and we'll hold up the color chart and say, is it like this? Is it like that? And then we'll agree upon it. Well, it's like this particular square. We're talking about the squares that we have. And then that's going to be blue to us, regardless of what our perception is. We can all agree upon that blueness with complete exactitude without having to bother ourselves with bother with perceptions.
Roland, I think you'd like to answer that one. I have a feeling.
Well, I think there is some fine distinctions here, which the fact that we appear to have so much commonality in our lives with other people is a bit of a problem because it seems overwhelmingly as though things are there independently of our knowledge, that they're out there, that there is a point 6 inches behind your head, or these things that happen are somehow nothing to do with us. But I suppose there's a question in my mind as to how we get to this. The first thing is the statement, the assertion that these things exist independently of our perception. It cannot be tested. It can't be. You can draw some inferences about what will happen in the future if you do certain things, whether someone else might agree with you about their opinion about something, whether the cup will be there when you come back into the room that was there when you left. But the commonality between people in terms of an objectification of knowledge, first of all, can never be tested. It's logically impossible. And secondly,
well, certainly it can be tested. For instance, you and I go into the room, and then we go out of the room, and then we come back into the room, to see if the cup is there. And I say, Roland, hand me the cup. And all of a sudden, your arm starts to move. You go down, you grab the cup, and you bring it over to me. We've just tested that hypothesis that the cup is in the room.
No, you haven't.
You understand exactly what it is because you were able to grab the cup and give it to me. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what my perception of the cup is.
All you have tested is your internal consistency of perception. But they haven't got anything else to test. That's why we have evidence, isn't it? We have evidence because we are looking for types of experience that we can then draw conclusions from.
But the field of evidence is the cup itself. There is nothing in addition to that we need to in order to be able to have evidence. The evidence is the cup. It's not something going on inside.
Are you the cup?
No, I'm not.
Well, how do you know the evidence is the cup? Surely the evidence is your observation of the cup.
No,
and your observation of the
no. You've got it just backward. I make the statement. The cup is on the table. That proposition is true or false based upon whether there's a cup on the table or not. It doesn't matter what I perceive.
Well, who knows that there's a cup on the table?
Well, I can ask my friend Roland to go get me a cup of coffee, and he'll take that object off the table, fill it with coffee, and bring it back to me.
So that's he will be able to. So he will be able to evaluate that, and you will be able to evaluate it.
Both of us, right?
But
the evidence is outside. The evidence is not internal. It has nothing to do with my perceptions. What makes
it? Who is making the evaluation?
False is it doesn't need to be evaluated. It's simply there. It's a fact in the world.
But who knows it's that?
We know it when we're in the room and I ask you to bring me a cup of coffee. You go march right up to the table, you grab it off, you go to the coffee urn, you fill it up, you bring it back to me, and you didn't evaluate anything. You simply got the cup. The cup was there.
What I'm trying to get to here is what is how can there be any knowledge about the cup unless someone knows it?
You don't need to know the cup. You just need to be able to
I'm talking about you knowing about the cup.
Well, I can see it.
Exactly. So you make you conclude in yourself about the cup.
No, when I say I can see the cup, I'm saying that I can make true propositions regarding that cup. And I don't have to experience the cup in any way. I can say that the cup is 4 inches tall. It's made out of porcelain. It's got a heavy feel to it. It's white. It's got a stain on the bottom. All of those propositions are either true or false because the cup either does have a stain on the bottom of it or it does not. The cup is either 3 inches tall or it is not. It has nothing to do with my knowledge. I can verify those things after the fact. And you can say,
who?
Well,
Moshe,
I can do it with you. I can say, look, you're saying.
But we are both in the same position, aren't we?
Is it 3 inches tall? So I take my ruler out and I put it up next to the cup and I say, you're right. It's not 3 inches tall. It's 3 1/4. But that doesn't matter because the cup is the evidence for the statement that I made. And now, upon looking at it, I find that my statement that the cup is 3 inches tall is in fact false, but now I know is 3 1/4. And how do I know that? Because I measured it.
Where is the cup happening?
The cup is on the table.
On the table. Where's the table happening?
The table's in the room.
And where is that happening?
The table's in the room in the building. Maybe we don't have to go in that direction.
I reckon.
Well,
the
I think we
cup
do.
only
Maybe all we need is the totality of facts. Maybe all we need is to be able to describe the world as we see it, and I'm using the word seeing in the way that I see the criminal in the police station. I'm not approximating that view. I'm actually looking at the guy who killed my daughters. Okay.
Well,
There's-
Sasha, I've got to jump in on that one point, because by next month, if you wanted me to, I'm not going to actually do this, but I'm sure I could come up with lists of about 1,000 people who have been executed in our country, in the US, based on exactly that kind of absolute certainty that that's the man who did it. We have an old tradition in the United States of doing that, and people are so sure about it. And so many people have died as a result of it. So I'm just saying, even the scenario you gave, there have been cases where there have been people in the wrong place, the wrong time, that matched the wrong features, and every single witness swore absolutely that was the man. In some cases, they were put to death. In some cases, they weren't.
There's a great film, isn't there, by Henry Fonda? 12
So
Angry
I think there is a danger on that when, as soon as we start saying absolute certainty about even things like the cup, and again, I'm coming from a little bit of this AI viewpoint, try to program that. There's a stain. What's a stain? What do you mean by a stain? Give me an exact definition of a stain. Give me the optical algorithms that calculate whether that is considered a stain or that is simply a molding mark on the cup. There are so many definitions.
In order for me to be able to
realize,
if I make the true statement, there's a stain on the bottom of the cup, I don't need an algorithm to make that statement true. That statement is true by virtue of the fact that the stain either exists or it doesn't exist. Now, you might want to say, oh, that's really not much of a stain. But, you know, when I take it to my wife and I show it, she says, well, Terry's bonkers. There's a stain on the bottom of that cup. We've got to wash it out. Okay. And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter what our perceptions are or whether we can write algorithms that will simulate those things. The evidence for the truth of the proposition there is a cup on the table is that there's both a table and a cup, and the cup is on top of it. It doesn't matter what our perceptions are.
Where does the evidence happen?
Where does it happen? I don't know. It happens in the room. It happens in the world. It
happens in your head. It happens in you.
The cup is either on the table or it's not on the table.
No,
it has nothing to do with my perception.
You've just talked about the idea of your murder that you mentioned. Who is providing the evidence of the murder? It's a person who has seen it. It's that person's judgment of the situation that constitutes the evidence that's presented to the court. It's not
when Ron is standing at the police station looking at the murderer, there's no question of interpretation there.
Well, there obviously is. If so many people have been executed, then there is a question. There must be a question. Otherwise, everyone who's executed was absolutely guilty, and we know that they weren't after the effect. So something was wrong.
Well,
there was a different perception. If I'm walking down the road, and we're walking around the road together. Oh no, I'm standing by a shop window, and you're walking down the road. And say, oh, there's a cup there, and we walk towards the cup, and you say, yeah, well, not really. And you walk towards the cup, and you realize that's not a cup. That's a painting of a cup. So when was it a cup? When you thought it was a cup, and now it's a painting of a cup. When is it a cup? When we can touch it?
The truth of my proposition that it is a cup is true if and only if it is a cup. If it turns out upon inspection that it is not a cup, that it's a painting of a cup, then that statement is false. Like Descartes, when he's walking toward the tower
and it appears to be round, and he gets closer to it, and then it appears to be square. The tower didn't change, okay, but the true statements about it.
That's exactly what
did.
Roland said. The tower did not change, your perception changed. I think that's what Roland's saying.
Yeah.
It's all in the head.
I mean, essentially, what you're saying is that at every point where something might, like, for example, the cup, you're saying, well, if as it was inspected further, more information was got, and therefore a different conclusion is drawn. But at each stage, the evidence for what it is that's there is all about observation. It's all the individual who has formed the evidence and is able to interpret it. It's the same in a court of law. What is presented is information from witnesses, objects that related to the.
Let me go back to my simple
essentially,
example.
You're talking about observations
of the cup being 3 inches tall.
Yeah, okay, hang on.
It either is 3 inches tall or it's not, and it depends upon the ruler that I put up next to it.
Well,
I could be wrong about it, but my perceptions, I could be wrong about it being 3 inches tall, but my perceptions have not changed. I have just judged it accurately with my accurate ruler.
Approximately with your non-accurate ruler, true. I agree. Because somebody might have a ruler that says it's not. But anyway, let's leave that for the moment. We'll come back to it. I'm sure we will. If not now, next month, the month after, and the month after that, because we always get back to it because it's very interesting. It's about reality. It's about existence, and we have to keep on coming back to it because it is to do with us and our perception. Whatever you say about it, it is always our perception, always. And that's what I said right in the beginning. And now we're going to get to Bill, and then we're going to get to Richard. Okay, let's go.
Hey, what about me, man?
You've been on 100 times. Hang on. Okay, hang on. I'm going to get to you. Don't worry. Don't worry. Right. You made good points. Right. I got to get to people who haven't talked yet. Bill.
Well, there seems to be a lot of people who talk a lot more than I have. And they haven't been shut out.
But that's all perception. But we'll get to you. Okay. We'll get to you. Don't worry. Bill. Can't hear you.
Thank you. Moisha's point. My sense is that we are always presenting evidence. And we have different degrees of confidence about our interpretations of that evidence. And my sense is that Moisha is saying, when I'm really confident about my interpretation, I'm going to make the inference that it is not the response to evidence, but it's real. And I'm not sure that inference is justified. Presenting evidence is all we have ever. And the difference is our degree of confidence in our interpretations of that evidence. And I suggest that may resolve the difference between being able to identify the perpetrator of the crime, where your high level of confidence is he looks just like the guy I saw do the deed, or not. And it seems to me that we allow for error, but we also have to recognize the degree of confidence that people bring to these issues. So that's a suggestion I have for resolving the conflict.
That's fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Yes, Richard.
Okay, leaving aside the main point, which is about whether it's perception or whether an object can exist in reality, I would like to raise the fact about form and function. I have a cup that I use to measure out dog food. I do not use it to drink. So is it a measure or is it a cup? Then we have quite a few dustbins, but we do not use them as dustbins. We use them for horse feed to keep the rats out. In fact, I've had to say to one of my son's friends when they were having a party here, that's not a dustbin, that's a horse feed bin, because they were going to throw their ash from their cigarette in with the horse feed. So even if you leave out whether it's perceptual enough, you can use something that you think of as one thing for something else. That's function. So the form and the function can actually separate out. And I would say that function is in fact possibly more important than form. For instance, if I've got a hammer and I hit a nail with it, I'm using it as a hammer's intended. But if I hit somebody over the head with it, I'm using it as a weapon. and yet it's still the same object. So I've forgotten what his name was, not Roland, the chap who was talking about cups and things, objects. Those objects have to be a matter of perception, because it's only when form and function are combined that you can even state that something was there. And even then, if you have, say, DTs because you've been drinking too much, or you've taken some drugs, you could possibly be imagining the whole thing. You can imagine you see the Holy Grail in front of you, but the Holy Grail is only a symbol. It doesn't exist at all. Well, in my opinion, it doesn't. So Galahad and Lancelot can go chasing after it, but they'll never actually find it. So therefore, even if we presume that some things are real in the world, we still have to work out whether that's a symbolic idea of something, or whether that's something that is being used in the way that it was intended. Oh, and talking about witnesses, I was in the Old Bailey once, and there was someone up at the dock, and in the magistrate's court earlier, the witnesses against him had been very good about describing him. But 6 months later, when they got to the Old Bailey, the main witness, the lady who had been mugged, was asked how she recognized the man. And she said, well, he's black and he's in the dock. And I'm afraid the whole case collapsed. I mean, so I really don't think you can count on witnesses ever.
Very, very nice. Phil.
I could have made that point stronger. I hear what you're saying.
Well, I actually want to go back to what I think the little discussion that Debbie and Terry had, because the point is something interesting. I am not so worried about the shadows, because I'm worried about the shadows within the shadows when you're in the cave. And I think my version of what I hear about Plato's cave is you left out a very important part. Of course, there was the shadows and there was the chain, and you were looking at the screen or whatever, the back wall, and you see the shadow, and you know, and that is your reality. And there's a fire in back. In fact, it was casting the shadow, but you forgot about the fact that I think there was actors or something that's casting the shadows, right? I think Plato actually had in mind about the playwrights, because I think he did not like for instance, Aristophanes making fun of Socrates. But nonetheless, the artist, there was a debate about the philosopher versus the poet. And I think that particularly with language, with new technology, anything that has to do with communications, it gives room for shadows to cast shadows itself. And that's, I'm very, very worried about the new technology, because it seems to me it could intensify the misperception, the lies, the conspiracies, all of that. And it seems to me that we have to be aware that the shadows within the shadows is a real thing. I remember seeing a tape of Robert Kiyosaki, the investor, and he was talking about the problem, the mistake that investors make, I mean, ordinary people make, is they think the money is real. And he says, no, if you think money is real and you're chasing it, you're a loser, because you will pay taxes. He says it's cash flow. Because what you do is you use your money, you borrow money, and you spend other people's money to, in a sense, acquire more income and cash flow. And not only that, if you do it right, you do not get taxed. Okay, so that is the reality. And somebody asked, well, shouldn't they be teaching you that? He says, well, you know, I've asked people about that, and they said, no, we can't teach that to people, because we need workers. We need workers. If everybody played the same game and they understand that, then the production of capitalism will never work. but only the people who are privileged to see beyond the shadow of the shadow do they understand that actually is the cash flow and how to use debt. Okay, now I do not even like Kawasaki, but I think he's sort of pointing out to something that when you talk about any kind of medium or language of any sort of thing in society, that can cast its own shadows. And I'm very, very worried about the new technology, not only for what I like what it could expose as new possibilities, but it could also create new darkness of casting shadows within the shadows, because there will be people who utilize the shadows and to create a deeper shadow. And that's the problem we're concerned with, because within humanity, not only is there a potential for goodness, but there's also the potential for badness or evil. And, you know, and we do not talk about that. And, you know, Plato himself, you know, as much as he criticized the poets, you know, because he was a philosopher, he wanted the reality to shine through, you know, the myth of the sun. It's like, yeah, but he wrote in poetic form, you know, so there's something very strange. And he never really told you what the forms were, you know, he just says the forms, which is a kind of poetic language. So I think we need to worry about, more importantly, not the shadows themselves, because we do live in the shadows, but how the shadows themselves could cast deeper shadows, because people would manipulate that.
Yeah, Frank, coming to you, Frank. So what you're saying is that the deeper shadows are more real than the lesser shadows.
The more you could get people to believe, the more real.
We get people to believe anything. They believe.
Oh, that's right.
They believe
that's
shadows and not shadows. They believe there's objectivity. They believe there's God. They believe all sorts of things.
But how many people? Okay. How many people, for instance, are chasing money rather than understanding that money is only an illusion that is really about cash flow? Now, I'm not even an expert in that, but I believe in what he said, and money, that's true. And and he said all the big investors, they don't talk about it because they don't want you to know.
Well,
they don't want you in the game.
So, oh dear, that's definitely problematic here. It means that those who know become very, very rich and know what's going to happen, and they know what really is. So when they go to a shop with money, well, they'll be able to buy things. They don't go to shop with cash flow. Here's the money I made it from cash flow. I want a pound of potatoes, please. That's real, isn't it? That's, yeah, well, you can call it shadow. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, these are all approximations of approximations of approximations. You've just given us another approximation, and then you're going to give the shadow of the shadow of the shadow of the shadow, and you're going deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're all approximations of approximations. That's all you're doing, which is fair enough, and I accept that, and that's the point I made. It's all approximation. Frank.
Well, if we're talking about perceptions, multiple approximations, why can't we talk about the cave, Plato's cave, as having multiple realities, the shadow and the sunlight?
They're both real, you mean?
Yeah.
I agree with that. They're all real.
That's it. So we don't have to sort of focus on what's the reality there.
Yes, we do.
We can say there are different realities.
Well, of course.
Or many realities.
I agree. Everybody's reality is true to that person.
Yes.
So
it doesn't have to be. So
where does it get us?
It gets you, if you go back to the case of the Plato cave, you don't have to decide what's the reality. You can say there are two realities.
No, but Plato made the point that there is a reality behind it.
Okay, we're trying to interpret it, right? You said you don't agree with it.
I don't agree that there is such a thing as the real reality, no.
That's right. That means there is probably more than one reality.
Well,
because you're saying that everything's an approximation. So
Yep.
even the reality is an approximation.
correct, because there is no reality, so it has to be an approximation.
Okay, it's a word. It's a word.
Well,
It's a label.
everything's
It's a
word.
mental construct.
Everything's word. So what?
Okay.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're saying what I said, that it's all approximately something else. They're all realities for whoever sees them as realities, but they're just approximate because you can find something else behind them.
Yeah, but when you talked about the cave, you decided there wasn't a reality.
I don't think
There wasn't Plato's reality.
I don't.
Plato meant it differently. I think the opposite for Plato, the world of ideas and not the material world is the reality.
Yeah.
So it's
the ideals. Yeah.
The ideas.
The universals.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the ideas that the soul or the spirit has already known before it had entered a human being or a body, and has entered the material, decaying, untruthful world. So the allegory here, the sun, because that's the because when the prisoner who escapes this cave, he's blinded, and he thinks, oh, where does all this come from? And then he can see the sun, and for Plato, the sun was the cause of everything, which is the ideas. And that's why he thought that philosophers need to rule, because they are the ones who practice and try to get to the truth. Plato did believe in the truth, in an idea, in absolutes, and the material world is just it's a reflection of it.
So Plato had no problems in reality. He had a reality.
But for Plato, the ideas of the forms was an aspiration that we should return back to. It was not the real thing. He was aspirational. It was like St. Augustine who turned it into reality, because Plato's form or the ideas became the mind of God, and that's absolute. That's the person who made it absolute.
Even if this form of idealism was correct, how can you describe it using language except by using metaphor? And therefore, you will never be able to say something that's exact, because you're always describing it by describing something else and saying that this metaphor fits. I mean, just like the cave itself is an allegory, everything we say is an allegory. So therefore, there can't be anything, if you like, that's real, although I do get a bit worried that us, talking philosophy, cause people like Trump and Johnson to be able to start arguing that there is no such thing as truth and you can have alternative truths and so on, when obviously some people are actually lying. And there is a difference possibly between the being absolute truth or objective truth and people deliberately misleading everybody else. And that point is becoming mixed up in public opinion.
That's true. That's because I haven't read my books and have never been to one of our Zoom meetings, so they wouldn't make that mistake. Roland, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I thought Richard was onto something really significant here about purpose, which is a bit of a dodgy area generally, but if we consider the idea that we have purposes, that we have drives, aims, things that we're trying to do, then I suppose it makes sense that we see things as either structures that support those aims or structures that get in the way of those aims. So I suppose what I'm really saying is that I think the the drive that we have in our lives is actually at the root of the construction of the knowledge we have about the world. That drive, you could say, selects patterns for identification and for use, or patterns that appear to oppose what we're trying to do. So it was really just what I wanted to say, that I felt that issue of purpose is actually much bigger than it looks. I think it's almost funny. Debbie was talking about the sun and Plato in Plato's cave. It's almost like the sun. It's almost the drive in our lives is an illuminator. It illuminates what is in our way, and it illuminates what is not in our way, which supports us, and we construct those forms from that illumination. So, yeah.
And don't forget that when somebody ran out of the cave and looked at the sun, it was blinded by it. The sun, the sun is not always not always the good thing that light things up. It blinds us. That's something else that we should think about. Okay, let us move on a bit. I haven't got very far in what I wanted to say, as usual, but I'm just gonna come up from the depths of the cave to go back to our squares. When we look at the squares, there's we all look as though we're equal. The squares, I think, are the same size. I just realized that. No, more or less not. Jim,
They're not squares, they're rectangles.
You see, they're approximately rectangles. Even Jim, you're the only one who's got a funny square. You have to do something about that. No, I'm just kidding. They're all rectangles. I call them squares, but you're right. You're right. The point is, there's a sense that we're all equal here, which we don't normally have. It's not apparent in a live gathering. Although he's not here today, some people sit really close to the camera to give an overbearing sense of being, an overbearing thing. That some people do that. Nobody here has done it, but it does happen. It does happen. It's sort of interesting. It's interesting. I don't notice it at the time. I notice it afterwards. And by the way, that is an example of the afterlife, because when you all go, all right, as far as I'm concerned, you've disappeared. And when I look at it the next day, I'm in the afterlife. I can see you again. You can't do that in real life. You can't replay this evening. You can't do it. I can. It's rather wonderful. And then I see things I haven't seen before. Then I can look at myself to see what I look like when I'm talking to, and it's actually very, very interesting. I'll send a link, and you can have a look if you feel like it. So it's rare, but sometimes people come into other people's square. Bill, somebody came into your square, and you're wondering about this. Suddenly you get a shock, because there's this world of that person, and then somebody comes in, and it suddenly is a very, very weird feeling. I have to tell you. When somebody leaves a square, this is very interesting. The person, for me, is dead, is gone. I mean, completely gone. It's not like before this whole business of the pandemic, when I used to travel and I used to give talks, I stood there, and I was on a platform, or not on a platform, but there was me and there was the rest, and I was talking down, in inverted commas, to everybody. And then when it was over, it took shorter than this took, by the way. There were rules. I had to talk for a certain amount of time, which is very dodgy for me. So when it was over, people didn't disappear. They sort of hung around. There was no end to it. Nobody pressed a button and we all disappeared. I stood there, and people came up to me and talked to me and went away. and gradually things moved away, and it's different here. And I find that interesting. People disappear into nothingness, into something that had been there, and black hole, possibly, but it's the absence of a person who'd been there, which reminds me of a story of the Mona Lisa that was stolen in 1911 from the Louvre, and there were crowds going to see that space where the Mona Lisa had been. There were more people who came to the Louvre than had ever come before to see that space where the Mona Lisa had been. That is the absence of something. Somebody didn't like my talking about, who was it who argued with me about nothing? Was it Moshe? I think he's gone. Moshe's become nothing. Oh, okay, fair enough. So I say that the basis of everything is set against an absence, and all, and this is for Morris. Where's Morris? I can't see him. Ah, yeah, there you are. All life is set against the absence of life. That it will end, and our whole being here in Zoom is the feeling that this, where we are now, is going to end, and that's what gives this particular session zest, because we know it's going to end. We know it. There's no doubt it's going to end. And I'm going to press the button and we're all going to disappear. But nobody's going to disappear. For me, everybody would disappear. Morris, yes.
I can only say how delighted I am that at last, somehow or other on these Zoom meetings, we have reached the point of understanding that death is at the center of it all. And that's why we're all involved in philosophy. It's taken a long time. I've been working away at it. I've tried to mention death every time, but it doesn't always work. But here you are, Ron, you've come up with it all by yourself. I'm really proud. And I just want to say that while you were talking about the squares closing and we disappear and all that, what was obvious to me was that you were talking about death. And there is an expectation of an afterlife. For you, it's tomorrow looking at the replay. But I think that's a really very watered down version of afterlife, because it's all going to be the same all over again. It's just you didn't notice it the first time round. However, all the rest of us, have an expectation of resurrection next month, when all this happens all over again. And all of these squares with all of these people that I only know from this in this context, all of these squares come back to life again, and somehow I'm filled with hope for yet another fascinating meeting. Maybe after all we have got somewhere in our examination of philosophy in life and, of course, in death.
I'd like to add that Ronnie never mentioned death. He said absence.
No.
This is only, I think, his British politeness not to use the D word.
You mean it's an euphemism?
It's a euphemism, yes. People pop off. People fade away. People pass on. Nobody dies, do they?
They kick the bucket.
They kick the bucket. They hand in their clogs. Oh, it's without end.
I object, because I remember the first time I spoke this evening, I said the problem of living, being in time, and I talked about encirclement, that living is encircled by the ever presence of death. And it seems to me he was not the first to set that. I said that from the very beginning. It's life that's trying to break out of that encirclement versus it being contained within the limitations.
But Phil, I agree with you absolutely. You certainly did that, and I heard you do that. And I thought here, he's actually going to use the D word, but it sort of, it was there, hinted at.
Okay. How's everybody doing? I'm surprised you're all sitting here looking with your eyes open. This is absolutely wonderful. So we're approaching the end. I've left out a lot of stuff, but as usual, somebody talked about the reality of money. I think that Zoom is a bit like that, not like money, because we're not going to make anything, even I don't make anything from this. So Zoom is an example of the ephemeral. It's like Bitcoin, really. I mean, it's worth something only because it's worth something. It's we say it is, and it's fine. I mean, after all, Zoom is an app, isn't it? It exists. Zoom exists. Here we are. But does it exist? How does it exist? But Bitcoin exists as well, doesn't it? Zoom is worth using when we use it. When we don't use it, Zoom doesn't exist, really. It exists when we start it off, right? I think, I mean, what is it? Where is it? Where is Zoom, apart from this thing that we've got on the little blue icon? Where is it? It's only here for me once a month. For you, those who are faithful also use it once a month. Those who are not faithful go to other people. But that's, you know, and that is Zoom. So an app exists only as a usable commodity. When it's eventually forgotten, it not only doesn't exist, but it never did. When we've forgotten something, it never was. There is no way that something that's forgotten can be not forgotten. You can't. I mean, are you with me? What I'm saying is that that the past is memory. Now, if Zoom disappears completely and nobody remembers it, there will never have been Zoom. Somebody, I'm sure Phil doesn't like this. Yeah.
You are quoting Marcus Aurelius.
Who said that?
I did.
Ah, well done.
Morris.
I don't think he spoke about Zoom, but I might be wrong.
I kind of object in this.
I
sense.
knew.
Okay? Because you're treading on dangerous waters because you're giving tacit approval to things like Facebook and all that, which means that the most important thing about Facebook or any of these applications is screen time, your eyeballs catching you. That's the most important thing. And because they made that the most important thing, all sorts of connivances could happen because they lure you into like wanting to keep looking rather than doing what is right and what's wrong. Okay. So in some sense, you're saying like, yeah, if money is not the evil of all things, it's almost like the attraction of the eyeball is the evil of all things. You're treading on dangerous waters because you're kind of making a kind of funny thing. You didn't kind of say that, but it's sort of, there's an implication that once is gone from your eyeball, it doesn't exist.
Oh,
and
no,
that's exactly
no,
what,
no, I know,
that's
I never
exactly,
said that.
That's exactly what Facebook and all those applications are trying to do, is to lure you into fixation into their screen time.
You cannot say I said something when I didn't, because I never talked about eyeballs. I never talked about seeing things. I talked about memory. I never talked about seeing anything. I said when it's gone from our memory, there is no past. We don't have that past. We don't have it. It's gone. And nobody can tell me that there's a past that I don't remember. You can tell me that you remember what I don't remember. But somebody who's lost his memory has no past. Nothing to do with eyeballs. I don't care about seeing things. I care about remembering things. If nobody remembers this meeting tonight, nobody remembers it, this will not have happened. If nobody remembers, not one person remembers it, nobody, this will not have happened. This will not be the past. That's what I'm saying. That the fact that I'm treading on dangerous ground, I agree with. I always do. Every time I come on here, I tread on dangerous ground. Every time I talk about reality, I tread on dangerous ground, and people don't like it. And it doesn't matter that they don't like it, because it's enough that you think about it and then say you don't like it, but then give me a reason why you don't like it. If you can tell me how something can exist that you do not remember, I would be pleased to know about it. And that, I agree, is dangerous ground. But that is progress. You might think it's a step back. For me, this is progress. For me, to talk about reality and existence and say that, as Roland said, that if you go on and there's nobody there, I mean, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. That's dangerous ground because it's frightening. And I agree, it is frightening. Like death is frightening, except we will never see it. So why is it frightening? We will never know what it is to be dead. We just won't know. That is dangerous ground, and I agree. Every time you come here on a Sunday, you will see me tread on dangerous ground. You won't like it. Some of you will hate it. Now, the thing about Zoom is very few people storm out. I mean, I don't notice it. When I go and talk live to people, it's not often they storm out, but I get daggers at me, and I can see they hate every minute of it. They hate it. They want to actually kill me, but they don't, because everybody's very polite. But I don't get it on Zoom because you're stuck in your squares and you go quietly. Some people say goodbye. I notice it now and again. But I mean, basically, you're extremely polite. It's really wonderful. And I know that a lot of you don't like what I say, because I talk about things that don't, if things don't exist because you don't know about them, that's dodgy. And now people go crazy wondering how I can say a thing like that. If I say something like that, then show me where I'm wrong. Prove it. Show me the evidence. Show me. Go for me. Okay, Terry, you're going for me?
Well, I have to make a comment from as being one of those folks who, as a scientist, engages in this thing called objective reality, which makes it really interesting that I was objecting so much to the arguments for that, because how you interpret that objective reality gets really interesting, and how you figure out what it might be is really interesting. Anyway, the information loss there, and this is kind of a fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics. It's not that I like what you're saying about forgetting, but what we tend to see, at least in terms of evidence in the physical universe, is even if you scramble the information enormously, you don't exactly lose it. It's extremely difficult. You could argue it's impossible to actually erase the information. Now, in all pragmatic terms, you can get it so scrambled that there is zero probability that it will ever be recovered. But it's a tricky business forgetting. This is why people in cybersecurity have found out through the School of Hard Knocks. You put something on a computer and you think you erased it. Oh, really? Did you really? So just that comment is that erasing in the sense that you meant of total erasure is just extraordinarily difficult in the way that a lot of it works out. But pragmatically, you can certainly do it. Hyper scrambling it certainly does, irreversible. But for whatever it's worth, just an observation on that.
Yeah, you're right. But if I know that something's been erased, I still have a memory of something being erased. If I don't have a memory of something being erased, it hasn't been erased because I don't know about it being erased, if you see what I mean.
Yes, no, and there's a point that you're making that I'm actually not even attempting to disagree with, because we have some common views on some of those points. I was just throwing in the hyper objective reality business. What did I describe myself to you once as a hyper pragmatic solipsist? So, because I was a solipsist at age, I don't know, 5th grade, and I just didn't know what it was called. But at the same time, I was also intensely scientific. So I don't know. It's the only way I can describe it. Hyper pragmatic solipsist.
Sounds fair enough. Jim. Jim, have you got your
Okay.
hand up? Oh, great.
Yeah, I think you've conversation moved on a little, but I was just going to say, Ron, you said that when you forgot something, your perception was it ceased to exist. My question would simply be, what happens when you remember it? Did it exist or did it not?
When I remember it.
Yeah.
Then we're getting on to a very difficult point. Well, then in that case, you're asking whether something existed before I knew it existed.
Did it exist because your perception was it didn't? Could it exist out with your perception?
No. Can you repeat that? It's late. Do you say that again?
I know it's. I'm maybe not following it very well. You've forgotten something, so it didn't exist. And if you're anything like me, I have a bad short-term memory. You remember something quite clearly later. Did it cease to exist for some time? Did it lose its sense of reality?
Yes. I mean, if I.
So now it exists again.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, if I don't remember.
How could it cease to exist just because you didn't remember it?
Well, how does it exist? Where does it exist? In what way does it exist as far as I'm concerned?
Well, it exists in your memory.
Yeah, but it isn't. No, but that's the point. I don't have the memory. Therefore.
But because you haven't got the memory of it temporarily.
I don't know it's temporary. If I knew it was temporarily, then I knew it would exist. It'll come again.
My scenario was that you remember it and you remember it lucidly. It did exist then, and it does exist now. What happened in the in between?
No. Why would there be? If I don't know something or of something,
it's not a question of knowing. You didn't remember it. It existed then.
Comes to the same thing. As far as I'm concerned, knowledge and memory is the same. As far as I'm concerned, it's again treading on dangerous ground. So if I don't know about something, then it doesn't exist for me, right? And if I then know something that I did before, but I didn't remember it, then again I will know it. But at the time I didn't know it, it didn't exist. Not for me. It couldn't do because it's just not there. It's like the tree in the forest. It's just not. I can't even talk about it. I can't talk about something that I don't remember. I can't. And okay, Ronald, yes.
Yeah, I just had a thought about this.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Maybe Terry could come in on as well. I mean, for example, so I've got a computer with a drawing program in it. Suppose I draw something on my computer and I save the file to disk, and then I turn off the computer. Has the drawing ceased to exist? If I turn back the computer on again and open the program and open the file, and there's my drawing. So what's happened in between? Well, as far as I can see, if we sort of apply that concept to knowledge, if knowledge is created on the fly, it's created from moment to moment, then it's pretty much the same thing. In other words, the idea of existence, possibly we need to like reevaluate what it means altogether, because for something to exist and not be something that we are knowing right now, that there seems to be a conflict there, because there's a time issue. If we're knowing something right now in an experience of knowledge, then the quality of that experience is different from the possibility of that happening at a later point. In the computer example, where I'm looking at that picture, I'm having a present moment experience of that picture. When I turn off the computer, I've only got the potential of recovering that. And so that to me distinguishes what's going on here, that if we think of existence as a state that's independent of our construction of knowledge, everything gets terribly weird. And we end up in a very strange, paradoxical kind of process. If we think of knowledge as built as we live in the present and essentially constructed from what resources we have available, memory, present moment experiences, and so forth, then it becomes, I think, easier to understand what's going on. And if we do lose, I mean, like anything, if for some reason our computer disk crashes and we've lost the access to that information, we can no longer construct it with our drawing program. Although there may be technologies that will enable us to recover that information at a later point and then construct it, but then something has to happen first. So I just thought there was a quite interesting parallel there.
Ron, you make some really fascinating points, and just to mention it, there's something that I find that is intriguing that's going on in physics right now, which is there's some serious reevaluation of just the very concept of equilibrium, of existence, of stability, that seems to be diving deeper into the roots of what physics has assumed. Just a very simple example. You've seen the videos where you say if you play the video forward, you play the video backwards, it looks the same, therefore you have time symmetry. And they say that the past is just like the future. Here's a simple point. That is blithering nonsense for a very simple reason. Light is being shown from the sun at an incredibly wasteful, totally non-equilibrium way of unbelievable quantities of energy just spewing out into darkness, going nowhere, utterly wasted. And a tiny fragment of that illuminates the scene and allows you to make a video of it. And to think that when you play that video backwards, you're capturing what happened in the physics is nonsense. Because what happened in the real physics was something unbelievably out of equilibrium. That was not stable. It was not all the same thing. I would postulate myself that part of what life is about creating the illusion of equilibrium, the illusion of continuity, the illusion of things going in a certain way. And life works very, very hard to do that. The first digital storage mechanism wasn't invented by people. It was invented in something called DNA. And that tells us something, because DNA, digital storage, has been around for a few billion years. We just finally glommed onto the idea. And there's something fascinating going on in reality, but several prominent physicists have really started exploring this and saying, maybe the world is the being right now, and getting away from this idea of the static, giant, crystalline universe where everything's perfectly formed ahead of time. I am very much not in that camp. For instance, in quantum mechanics, when people talk about all the different positions the electron could be in the electron orbital, I like to say a very simple contrary point. It says, no, the orbital is the electron, period. You mentioned the word potential. That's exactly the operative thing. Just as the program is the potential in that, all those possible futures of that electron are the potential if you add a lot of energy into it. But what is weird is that for centuries, mathematicians just skip over that little detail. Just ignore the fact that it's not actually like that, but it could be like that. But therefore, because it could be like that, I will pretend it's like that. And reality doesn't work that way. It's a potential, not an actuality. And many actualities just go into blithering nonsense. The whole string theory thing, which is starting to fade slowly, was just a fantasy that makes angels in the head of a pen look like, serious engineering analysis. And I'm sorry, there may be some string theorists out there. I'm sorry for that. It's just blithering nonsense. It always was. Will continue.
I would like to. I would like to flip this upside down, because I'm more interested in the fact that there could be false memory. And how does that work? Because that actually happened to me. I remember watching a movie, and the only scene in the movie I really liked was that this guy, it called the Egyptian, this Egyptian guy fell in love with this harlot. She was very beautiful, very desirable. And so finally, after giving her everything, including his parents' house, she promised that she would show her what true love meant. What was the meaning of true love? And so he gave her everything, and then she quickly threw him out of the house, right? And I remember distinctly, that was my memory, distinctly. And he said, well, why you promised me you would show me what true love is? And she said, I've kept my promise. I've shown you exactly what it is. True love is unrequited, okay? That's what I remember. And I remember this distinctly. And I actually told that story, like 15 years later to my roommate. And, and we talked about that, that concept of love and all that. And later on, much later on, I was looking at a video store. There was an old video because they were changing the DVDs. That was the Egyptian. I said, oh, I got to get a copy of this. And so a little later, I looked at it again, and the scene wasn't there. She just threw him out. And I said, well, wait a minute. I must have just gotten a bad copy. Let me check some other copies. I checked several copies. I said, well, maybe I saw that in another movie. So I saw the 10 Commandments was a similar scene, but 10 Commandments and the same thing. I said, well, wait a minute. I finally had to admit that I remember that, because to me at that time, and my memory was that was the image, the story that was more beautiful than the other story, just threw him out. And it was so real to me that I actually remembered it. I repeated the people totally believing it. Now, it still could be possible. There's some hidden ones, it's not shown. But now I believe that never happened. I had a false memory. Now, what happens when you have a false memory? Is that real? Because now if you do that, then look, I'm a painter. I'm kind of like, in that sense, like a poet. I believe in all sorts of possibilities. But if you actually admit that's a possibility, then you could get to also a point of the fantastical. It's like, and you could truly believe it, which is what you're saying about possibly string theory. Now, I'm not quite sure it's quite that fantastical, but nonetheless, so there is a problem in coordinating that, because unless you just say, well, it's only real at that moment. Well, at that moment, that was very real in my memory. And I had to later on just admit that that was not real. I've experienced it. I believed it, but it wasn't. So how about false memory?
Phil, can I ask you something? Because I've seen you here many, many times. So what I'm going to say is really naughty.
Okay.
Please get hold of my book called Time to Tell. You asked a question about false memory. It's in there together with all the rest of it. If you don't get anything out of it, I will send your money back. How about that? I just want you to read it. I don't want you to buy it. I want you to borrow it. I don't care. Please read it, because I talk here and it's all sort of coming out of what I actually wrote. And I can't talk for long here because only bits of what I actually wrote. So if you do that and let me know and come back to me. I only say it now because there are very, very few of us. So you don't think I'm doing a commercial thing here, because I want to make a lot of money from your one book. Okay. So please do it. And then tell me you asked the question. There it is. The answer's there. An approximate answer before somebody leaps at me. An approximate answer. Okay.
Bill, I'm going to jump in with an endorsement. When you were saying that, I was thinking this is Ron's turf, and you should read Ron's book. So I would agree with him that I think it is an interesting book on the kinds of questions that you're talking about there. So I would second his recommendation. So there we have a little independent verification.
Thank you. Anyway, it's been really, really good. I really enjoyed it. If does anybody else want to say something? I saw a hand. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard.
Quickly.
Yes.
You'll probably tell me to buy your book as well. but I'd like to
But you
concatenate.
have, haven't you?
Of course, of course. Can I concatenate? I've tried to get it out of the library. Can I concatenate Roland and Phil, I think it was. Roland mentioned a hard disk crash. So you've got a picture, hard disk crashes, you recover what you can. There are holes in the picture. Now, you could try and recreate exactly the picture that was damaged by the crash, because not all sectors will have gone. And I think the brain is the same. Not all you never lose all the memories, you lose partial memories. But when you put it together, you could actually improve on the original painting. And I think that Phil did just that. He, as an artist, improved on his memory of the film, where his memory had a partial disk crash, if you like. And that is why he actually had created a far more poetic speech by the woman, which I actually really like. I've never seen the film, but I think that sounds a very reasonable sort of way for it to end. And I think that with all memory, you never totally, well, I mean, you know how difficult in a computer, it is really difficult to lose everything. Even if you try and wipe your disk, reformat it, it is still possible to actually recover quite a lot of it. With a disk crash, you never lose the entire disk. The only way I know would be to take the disk out and actually bash it with a hammer, and even then, or maybe smear your hand over it. And anyway, most things will have been saved not just on your hard disk, but they will have been saved on different formats. So you'll have memories that go on lasting. And I would suggest that someone dies, they're no longer there, but while they live in the hearts of other people, even though those memories are flawed, there is still something of them there. And if they exist in words, in books, like your books and my poems and Phil's paintings, then something of them goes on into existence until the last part disappears.
Richard reminded me of something that I meant to say to Phil earlier, which is, pardon me on this, or give me a quick definition. Chimpanzees are extremely clever problem-solving animals. They share they share every single brain protein we have. Their cellular structure is extremely similar. They are capable of doing, some of them are smarter at solving problems than the average Joe, but they're not humans. And you know what the biggest difference is? And here's what I suggest, and this fits in, Phil, with what you were saying. The key difference in what humans do that is different, it's not so much the overall structure of the brain, but it's the fact that we allow ourselves to dip into the imagination as if it was the now. We call that the imagination. We dip into our memory as if it was real. And this has two things. It allows us to explore worlds that didn't exist, and it allows us to go insane. And sometimes allows us to kind of go a little bit in both. So the whole process of creativity is partly that thing where we mix and match. We take the world as it is right now as we see it, but we also add in something new, maybe some piece that we have from that. So I just find that one of the fascinating aspects of it's not so much that our brains are that different from so many other mammals, they just aren't. But on that one point, they are. That's where you really see the difference, the ability to loop back and create realities that did not exist and that are not from our immediate sensory perception. All the other mammals, even the chimpanzees, are tied very tightly to what's going on now. And as your case is fascinating because that's what you did. You took what was now, but then you made something new out of it that was fascinating and a better ending. Yeah. And unless George Lucas was involved, because he actually does go out and buy all the old copies and strip out his parts he doesn't like. So unless George Lucas was involved, yes, it's probably something that you created, although there is a pathological exception there. So that's enough.
Very nice. Thank you very much, everybody. I just want to say just one line about those who think they see themselves as they are. Just want to mention that every photo of yours, of you, is when you were younger. I'll leave you with that thought. And I'll see you next month, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks very, very much. You're very polite and very nice. Bye,
Good night, Ron.
everybody. Bye, everybody.